I had just returned home from a 2-day conference in Texas when my wife caught me by surprise. When I walked into the house, Casey and our kids were sitting at the kitchen table. The atmosphere was festive, and they were all laughing and joking. When I asked, "What's so funny about this?" their mood changed. Casey said to me, nodding towards the empty chair, "Billy, why don't you sit down?" Not really asking, but doing it in a kind of commanding manner. Not suspecting anything bad, I sat down, and she waved a stack of some papers in front of my nose. "Billy, take these and read them," she demanded, slapping them down on the table in front of me. "I'm not asking for anything except a house. And one more thing. There are adoption papers in there with all the other papers. I want Jeff to adopt the kids. I know you want the best for them, so just sign this and we can move on." Casey gave her speech, apparently rehearsed in advance, looking as cool as a cucumber. My wife of 12 years just handed me divorce papers, as well as adoption forms for my 3 children. My son Devin looked at me with a small smirk on his face. Devin was 10 years old. Joy, my daughter, didn't even bother to look at me. She was 9 and too busy listening to her iPod to care about the loss of her father. Patrick, my 7-year-old son, was the only one who had anything to say. "Dad, Jeff has a huge house and we all love it," Patrick explained his joy, as if that would make everything so much better. I just sat there looking at Casey and the kids like, fuck, they were all crazy. Maybe it was PMS or early menopause, I thought. Or maybe the bitch was bipolar. Shit, she was probably high or wasted. No, I don't smell alcohol on her. So where did all this divorce crap come from? Seeing that I wasn't reacting, Casey shrugged, gathered the papers from the table, and threw them on the counter. In their place, she laid a check in front of me for half the money in our bank accounts. "Okay, you'll have time to read the papers later. Here, take your check, Billy, and don't forget it." "Kids, get up and take your father's bags to his car," Casey demanded, clapping her hands vigorously and shooing them out of their seats. "Fucking unbelievable! They collected all my things before I even got home, and then ambushed me before suddenly attacking and shooting me point blank with a high-caliber gun." "Casey, do you seriously think I'm going somewhere?" I finally asked her in a slightly threatening tone. "Yes, Bill. You're moving out, weren't you listening?" Casey answered me, irritated and as if scolding a naughty child. "Casey, this is actually my family's house. My parents let me live here long before we got married, and I don't recall your name being mentioned on any documents related to this house." I gradually raised my voice, reminding her of something she seemed to have slightly forgotten. "I don't know what the hell happened to make you want a divorce, but you're never taking my parents' house, so you can go wherever you want, but I'm staying here, okay?" I snapped. Casey rolled her eyes, and, realizing she wasn't going to win this argument, she changed her orders and yelled at the kids to pack their things. They were going to have to change their plans and go to Jeff's house, she announced, down the hall. "Casey, who the hell is this Jeff?" I now had the chance to ask. "Billy, are you an idiot?" Casey said through clenched teeth, her growing irritation turning into undisguised contempt. "Jeff is the man who fucked me senseless while your dumbass was stuck at work every day," Casey said with some kind of sadistic pleasure and the same grin. She didn't seem to feel guilty or remorseful at all. There was nothing on her face but an expression of disrespect and contempt for me. I looked at my children, who had reappeared in the kitchen for support. My daughter merely yelled at her brothers to hurry up, then turned to me. "Dad," Joy said, "Jeff can give us a better life. Besides, Mom loves him, and so do we." My sons nodded vigorously in agreement with their sister. I stood up, casually brushed Casey aside with my shoulder as I walked out of the kitchen, then walked to the door and pulled it open. They all grabbed their bags and headed for Casey's car. "Casey, don't you fucking dare touch that car!" I yelled after the gang as I stepped out onto the porch. I'm paying for it, and it's in my name. Get the fuck out of here with your little rats. Call your asshole and ask him to pick you all up, you pathetic bastards." Casey and the kids looked back at me, and all of them grinned and flipped me the bird. Slamming the door, I was beside myself with rage. I mean, I worked my arse off for this family, and they dumped me for some asshole with money. Well, to let off some steam, I did what any normal guy would do in a similar situation. I got completely wasted, heroically destroying the available supply of alcohol in the house. I ended up passing out face down on the tiles next to the washing machine. For the first time in my life, I hated someone. Of course, I hated that asshole Jeff first and foremost, but I was even more angry and disgusted with my apparently former family. I realized that it wasn't just the rich bastard. My so-called family had decided to betray me. The next morning, once I was sober, I got myself together and then went online and, after a bit of surfing, found a lawyer. I made an appointment with him for noon the next day. Since they admitted to adoring this Jeff guy so much, I figured I'd give them what they asked for. My attorney looked over the agreement. My wife left me yesterday and advised me to sign it before Casey changed her mind. Okay, I put my squiggles in all the right places, and the lawyer sent the papers back. Casey, apparently, was so charmed by her rich Pinocchio with his wooden dick that she didn't even ask me for any alimony. In the blink of an eye, with the stroke of a pen, I no longer had a wife or children. My ex-family simply threw me out like a crust of stale bread. So much for all the staying together until the kids grew up and moved out of the family home, or the empty dreams of growing old together. To hell with all these stupid, ridiculous fantasies. 6 months later, divorce became final. As they say, time changes everything, and I changed too. What I did was throw myself into my work. I went back to college and got my master's degree, and then my doctorate. I was now Dr. William Capps, with the hefty addition of a PhD in accounting. I know most people think accounting is a pretty boring subject, but then again, that's pretty much how my life was. Apart from what my ex-family did to me, anyway, accounting was my style, something I actually enjoyed doing. After I received my PhD, I decided to open my own office. My strategy was to provide high-quality service that provided a personalized approach to wealthy upper-middle-class clients. Gradually, thanks to complimentary word of mouth, my client base began to grow. By the end of my second year of practice, I had amassed quite a fortune. I also met a very nice lady named Patty. She was everything I was looking for in a woman. She was hardworking. She liked all the same things I liked, and she liked to be around the house. Patty was a little taller than Casey, and she had all the right curves in all the right places. By the end of my 4th year of business, my firm had grown to the point where we needed space to expand our office. Rather than continue to rent space from someone else, I calculated the future benefits and purchased a 5-story freestanding office building. Patty and I loved our new private headquarters so much that we even had our wedding on the 4th floor. It was a small but festive event for the two of us and the few guests we invited to our little celebration. We must have had too much fun at our wedding and the night after, because a few months later, Patty found herself pregnant. I would have loved to have more alone time with my wife, but sometimes you have to accept what life throws at you. There would soon be 3 of us, and my life had really taken off in the last 6+ years. Needless to say, I was surprised, no, astonished, when one day I was handed documents about the payment of double alimony. Casey, who suddenly emerged from oblivion, demanded $3,000 a month from me in child support, and at the same time to rip off another $432,000. Apparently, this bitch calculated this lost profit for the entire period that she was warming her sides with her fat Crucian carp Jeff. I couldn't help but laugh at this news. My God, I hadn't seen or heard anything from this mercenary gang for 7 years, and the first thing they want is money. When I gave the papers to my lawyer, he looked them over, and after he finished laughing, he picked up the phone and called Casey's lawyer. From what he had learned from his colleague, Casey was broke and alone at this point, but she had heard through the grapevine that I had become a very successful owner of a thriving business. This news, on the one hand, hurt her pride, and on the other, it inflamed her inherent, greedy instincts to an incredible degree. To her great disappointment, she also learned that I had remarried and that my wife and I already had a child and another one on the way. Casey's husband, the aforementioned moneybags Jeff, was not averse to screwing Casey in every way possible, but he was not thrilled with family life with 3 capricious morons, so one day he simply disappeared, leaving no trace. A week later, Casey was served with divorce papers. Naturally, the freedom-loving fucker refused to pay child support. To do this, he found some tricky ways to have the adoption declared invalid. Jeff convinced the judge that Casey had forced him to sign the papers with an ultimatum. Either he signed the adoption papers or lost everything he had worked so hard for, which is why he supposedly had to sign the papers. Now that their marriage was officially over and all the money the hen and her chicks had was spent, it looked like Casey's next target was me. My ex-wife's tactic was to involve my parents in the matter. As it turned out later, she had been in touch with them since she left me. On the one hand, it was understandable for the parents. They wanted to remain a part of their grandchildren's lives. On the other hand, my mother and father did not tell me a word about the fact that they had been communicating with this otter all this time. For me, this was an unpleasant discovery. Casey played the role of the broken wife who made a stupid mistake skillfully. My parents took the bait like 2 starving piranhas swallowing hook, line and sinker in one fell swoop. Simply put, they were completely on her side. My father was the first to come to me. He talked to me about forgiveness and about doing the right thing in life, about how, if he were in my place, he would definitely try to find a way to restore the family. I cut in somewhere in the middle of his lectures and pointed out the fact that I now had another family and a new, beloved wife. At the same time, I tried to remind him how Casey and the children had treacherously abandoned me. As if my arguments had not been heard, my father advised me to be a man, pull myself together, and fix my marriage with Casey. "Patty'll be fine. She can start over," he said good-naturedly. "You'll just have to take care of the kids and pay child support." I looked at my dad like he was crazy. For the first time in my life, I had no respect for the eldest Caps. However, that didn't stop me from personally walking to the door, opening it, and politely asking Dad to get lost. My mother was the next to show up, walking to the house with some big guns in her hands. Mom laid it out firmly to me. If I didn't take Casey back, I would have to move out of the house so they could give it to her and their beloved grandchildren. I couldn't believe my ears or my eyes that these were my parents. My business was doing great, so I just went out and bought my own house. A week after enduring my parents' lecture, I received an eviction notice, graciously giving me a month to pack up my belongings and move out. I didn't mind, because my new home was closing the day after I got that email. It's amazing how, when you pay cash, people will bend over backwards to make sure everything goes smoothly and quickly. My parents returned to their old house a week later, only to find it empty. Casey and her brats moved in the next day. 2 years had passed since then, and in that time I hadn't spoken to my parents, Casey, or her children. Patty and I were doing great. We had 4 kids running and crawling around our new house, and our business was doing just fine. This year, I was named Businessman of the Year in our region. the local newspaper ran a very nice photo of me and my smiling family. I proudly accepted the award, and in my acceptance speech gave most of the credit for winning it to my embarrassed wife. "Without my wife Patty," I said to the numerous spectators and guests at the gala dinner, "there would be no reward for me. My wife is my support." While I was giving my speech, my dear dad and mom suddenly came into the room, along with Casey. My ex-wife resolutely made her way right to the stage, from where she loudly called me a loser father. Playing the victim, with crocodile tears in her eyes, she told the entire assembled company that I had shamelessly and cruelly abandoned my children and herself. At the end of her indictment, Casey tragically declared that it was Patty who had destroyed her marriage. I think my lawyer must have been prepared for this scandal in advance. He somehow sensed that Casey would take advantage of the opportunity to attack my reputation and at the same time publicize his false story. The lawyer took a remote control out of his pocket and pointed it at the projector, located at the end of the room. As we know, private detectives can be very inventive in collecting dirt on various scumbags, and what advanced technologies they use. It's truly amazing. On the empty wall of the hall, to which the eyes of all those present immediately turned, a recording of Casey's conversation with her lawyer, which took place in the parking lot in front of his office, began to be shown. The two were discussing ways in which she intended to cancel the adoption papers I had signed long ago, at her own request. Casey promised her lawyer that if he got the court to throw out the papers, the fucking she'd given him this afternoon would be nothing compared to what he'd get from her once the papers were thrown in the trash. Then they discussed how they would arrange for Patty to be drugged and raped. They would then send me a video so I could see proof that Patty was cheating on me, at which point Casey would come in with his consolation and sympathy and take my heart back. This is the plan they cooked up. Finally, she also told her lawyer accomplice how she manipulated my parents into being her puppets. Otherwise, they would not be able to see their grandchildren. When the short video ended, Casey's attorney attempted to slip out the side door like a slippery eel. Fortunately, his progress was stopped by the police chief's massive biceps. It seemed that several of the judges, also in the courtroom, had taken some interest in the scandalous, incriminating footage. I took a long look at my dejected mother and father, then went over to my wife and children, helped them into their coats, and we left. Outside, I kissed Patty, and we all headed to the car. As soon as I finished placing the children in the back seat, my parents called out to me. Without looking back at them, I took my place in the driver's seat, slammed the door, and drove my family home. I didn't see them again until I was called to testify against Casey and her lawyer. When I finished the formalities and walked out of the courtroom, my father was waiting for me outside. "Billy, I can't tell you how sorry my mother and I are," he began apologetically, "but please, son, give us a chance to try and make things right. You have 3 children who miss you and suffer without a father. We have 4 grandchildren we've never met. Son, you have to find it in your heart to forgive us and bring everyone back together, the whole big family." I looked at him heavily and turned away. After taking a few steps towards the exit, I finally stopped and, turning around, told him that I would think about it. Casey was sentenced to 3 months in prison and 4 years probation. Her idiot lawyer was disbarred for conspiracy to defraud the judiciary and me personally. The Department of Child Welfare informed me that my children from my first marriage would be placed in foster care unless my parents or I took them into our custody. I told my parents that they could have these selfish brats. My father told me that one day I would have to forgive them all, and then asked if it was so bad that he and his mother wanted to be a part of their grandchildren's lives. "We're old, son, and as much as we don't want to, were going to miss out on most of their lives, he sighed. With your marriage, you just gave up and moved on. What about us, Billy? Are you so heartless that you can't see that she made a mistake? Dad persisted. No, I replied with patient weariness. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be involved in their lives. But I disagree with you. Casey didn't make a mistake. She was a cold-blooded bitch who got what she deserved in the end. As for the kids, they chose this asshole and hopped out of our house to be with him. Remember, Dad, you told me before that there are things in life that can't be forgiven. And you also warned me, saying that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. You haven't forgotten your words, have you? And what happened then, Dad? Then you just turned your back on me, and Mom, by the way, too. The reality is that Casey lied, cheated, and turned the kids against me, and after all that, you still took her side, which means you were acting against me, Patty, and my family. Now, you want me to act like nothing has changed. Father, you are a man old enough to realize that you made the wrong choice, and now you and Mother will have to live with the consequences. What I told you about happened 10 years ago. Unfortunately, after all that happened then, Casey never learned her lesson. She remarried and tried to cheat on her husband the same way she did with me. And again, nothing good came out of her double life. Only the consequences of her betrayal were different. Casey's new husband caught her with her latest lover and killed them both. He was so determined not to be a cuckold that he tied the lovers to the bed they were fucking on, doused them with gasoline, threw a lit match, and left. What was left of Casey had to be identified from her dental records. Casey and I have grown-up children who are living the lives we raised them to live. Devin and Patrick are doing their asses in jail. As for Joy, well, before anything bad could happen to her, she came to our house and begged to be a part of our family. Kind-hearted Patty insisted that Joy had been led astray by her wicked mother and that we should accept her and help the young girl lead an honest and honorable life in the future. My parents did get to know Patty and me and our children before they passed away. In their will, they left everything to me, but asked me to distribute their property fairly among their 7 grandchildren. As for Patty and me, the day is not far off when she and I will become parents, and then I intend to enjoy every minute when my beloved wife will again belong entirely to me alone. Maybe to some of you, Billy Capps is an asshole because he didn't fight to keep the family together or because he dropped everything and left. And I, Billy, will say this: some things are just not worth fighting for. That's the end of this story. If you found it engaging, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe for more content like this.